Welcome to the Scale with Strive podcast, a place where you come to listen to some of the world's most influential leaders within the SaaS industry. I'm your host, Dylan Hoyle, and today I had the pleasure of connecting with Ellen Chisa from Boldstart Ventures. Boldstart Speciality is partnering with founders at Inception, and today's conversation was centered around advice for early stage founders when looking to build a company. My key takeaways from today: the first steps that a founder should take when they have an idea, the specific qualities that VCs look for in founders when considering investment, and lastly, some of the common mistakes that founders make when pitching to venture capitalists. Let's dive in. Ellen, it's fantastic to have you on the Scale with Strive podcast. Thank you very much for joining us today. For the listeners out there, Ellen is currently a partner at Boldstart Ventures, where she's been for 3.5 years, a Boldstart specialist in inception-focused investment within the cyber developer tool and biz apps type of space. And previously to that, Ellen was also the CEO and founder of Dark, where she raised over 5 million in capital. Ellen, it's great to have you.
Yeah, it's great to see you again. Thanks for having me to chat today.
For sure. And obviously we had the joys of meeting up in Boston a couple of weeks ago when you came to our event, but I'll let you introduce yourself for the viewers out there.
Absolutely. I'm Ellen. Like Dylan was saying, I'm a partner at Boldstart Ventures. We like to partner with founders as early as possible in their journeys. We're often meeting people even before they incorporate and starting to talk to them about their ideas. At that stage, we invest a wide range of capital. We want to make sure people have the right amount to get their company going. And so for some people, they want to stay tight and focused. Maybe it's only a few hundred K. For some people, maybe it's their third time being a founder and they know exactly who they want to hire and where they want to go. And that can be more than 5 million. And we're happy to participate in all of those types of rounds.
Awesome. And I guess taking it back a little bit before Boldstart, obviously you did studies in engineering essentially, so always been within that world. But would love to find out a little bit more around Dark and that story a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yes, I was an engineer by training originally. I actually went to, at the time, a brand new college called Olin College in Massachusetts. And so I've always been fairly entrepreneurial. It's quite interesting to go to an unaccredited college and try to explain to people why that matters. From there, I did a bunch of different product and engineering roles. And one of the things I kept coming back to is that I feel like everyone should be able to build software the same way everyone can write documents and distribute them. Everyone can take imagery now that we all have smartphones. Everyone can make videos. And so it felt like software didn't really have that equivalent experience. And so Dark was a programming language, and it was a true programming language that enabled people to just write backend code and then have the infrastructure provisioned under the hood. So if someone was writing something for, say, an API endpoint, they would just write the logic they wanted to happen at their API endpoint, and Dark would deal with all of the API related infrastructure.
Awesome. And I guess like where you are today, there's probably the advice that you can give to founders having been in their shoes and having raised capital and going through that early stage. I imagine one, it builds credibility, but I also imagine you have a lot of empathy for them in their situations.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like it's one of those things when I look back at old emails or old things I worked on during Dark, it's very easy when you're looking at hundreds of different companies per year and actively being involved with 10 at the same time to see kind of some of the patterns. And as a founder, you're always very much in your own world and you can be the deep expert in that particular space, but sometimes you don't have the same broader sets of context that someone else might have on the market. And so I think I always try to work with founders and understand both where they're sitting and their viewpoint and how they see their company fitting into the ecosystem, but also kind of help to give them the perspective they might not have or bring more options to the table or give them more leverage to apply to the situations they're facing.
And do you see that quite a lot in founders? Like, because I imagine they can be so immersed in their own world and their own environment that sometimes they'll struggle to see different viewpoints. And I imagine it's obviously that's where someone like yourself would come in.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of founders, especially we work primarily with technical founders at Boldstart. And like you said, our big categories can be cybersecurity, infrastructure, developer tooling, some other SaaS and enterprise work. We'll see people who want to come in and tell you a lot about what they built and why. And like, I love having conversations about what people have built. That's really fun. But at the end of the day, if you're thinking about a customer or a buyer, be that a CISO, a CIO, a head of engineering, they still want to understand what problem you're solving for them. And so you really need to go in and talk about that pain first and understand their situation before getting into like, look at this cool thing that I built. And so a lot of those context conversations are about that, which is like, it's not just about what you've done, it's about what will the impact of that be for your
Yeah.
customer.
Nice. And listen, throughout this podcast, we're going to dive into the startup journey, taking in companies from idea to inception to Series A. But just again, taking a bit of a back step. Obviously, you left Dark, went over to Boldstart for the last 3.5 years. I guess like, why the VC route, Ellen? What about that route was engaging for yourself?
Yeah, so that wasn't actually originally my intent. And this is one of the things I love about the Bold Start team. We're always looking to work with people that we really like. And we see a lot of founders in the portfolio come back and start a second company, work with us again. We'll see people who are employees at portfolio companies start new companies, but like we like to spend time with people once we know them. And from my perspective, Bold Start was an investor in Dark. And so that was how I really got to know Ed and Elliot and Shomek. And it's been a bunch of time with the people who are my partners now. And so when I left, they were like, "Oh, we know we like working with you. We've enjoyed this experience. Why don't you come here to Boldstart?" And I was kind of like, I don't know. I don't know if I want to be a VC. I like building things." They were like, "It's cool. We'll figure it out together." And so I kind of came in not being sure if I would start another company or if I would be more in an operating partner role and helping support the portfolio on product related questions. Or I had been an active angel investor. So there was definitely like a chance I would want to invest more. And as time went on, it just became clear that there were a lot of deals that were a great fit for the Bold Start ecosystem that I found and was interested in working with the founders on. And so I ended up deciding to stay on as a partner.
So you fell into it. Like, I guess everyone always falls into something, right? It always happens like that.
I feel like in VC in particular, there's a lot of people who kind of fall into it by just the nature of being around and working on interesting problems.
Yeah, and Boldstart's like an exceptional VC, right? Sneak, big idea, like such amazing investments. And I guess for the people out there who aren't too familiar with Boldstart, I guess what's the story of the VC? Where's their focus? Where do they come in at?
Yeah, absolutely. So Boldstart, my partners Ed and Elliot started the fund back in 2010. One of the things I love is that we work in a lot of similar ways to how we would encourage founders to work. So the first Boldstart fund was only $1 million. It was 10, 100K checks. So very experimental for the time. And at the time, people really weren't doing as much early stage investing. So like I think now it's quite popular, but then it was more groundbreaking. And similarly, they were based in New York and bringing a lot of enterprise customers to the table. And so that was the original prototype. They then moved that into a $12 million fund two. And then fund three, which is the fund Sneak is in, was a $47 million fund. And so it's been growing from there. And I think the things that have really remained consistent are just this discipline around wanting to be super early with founders, wanting to work with technical founders, and looking for people who are solving big enterprise problems.
And I guess why is that? Why the idea phase? Because like for a lot of VCs, it's probably the most difficult bit, turning from an idea to inception to gaining that first funding round. Like that is the most difficult aspect. Why are Boldstart so focused on that?
Yeah, I think we think that's the place where we can give the most benefit to a founder. So if you look at it, the bet you are making to say, "Hey, we like these people and we like these market and we don't have to see anything else." That's really having very deep conviction in someone and their ability to solve a problem. And I think our DNA is just that like when we're in, we're all in and we're going to offer to lead the entire round. We're going to offer to take it all. We'll cut back if we need to, but we're going to be in there with you. I think the other thing about that is when you're getting started from the very beginning, you can kind of get things set up really effectively. And so we have an entire Notion community where founders can access resources and partners and find great people to work with on the recruiting side, on the hiring side, on the banking side, on the finance side, whatever it is. We'll help people with some of those logistical aspects. But it's also about the other big questions that come up for founders early on. A really great example, since we're working with enterprise companies, is how do you pick your first three design partners? And so it might be you're in the position where you're saying, "Oh, I have like I'm in the great position of I have a lot of options." But just having a lot of options, you don't know which of those design partners will be hard to get through contracting, which of them will give you the most active feedback, what questions you should be asking, if you can ask for a customer testimonial, if you can ask them to be a reference for your other leader customers. So really helping people narrow in on who the first three customers should be and getting those relationships built is something we can help a lot on. And then similarly, we tend to think the best founders come with people they're excited to hire for their team, but kind of making sure those people are going to thrive in the startup environment and getting that going is something we can also add value on.
Yeah, and I think Boldstart sets themselves apart from the resources that they can plug in and like the numerous success stories that they've had over the years and being able to leverage those pieces of experience for future founders. And I guess it leads us quite nicely into the next bit. So, what I think any founder that's listening to this particular episode, what their main focus that they should look to get out of it is how can we take our idea to an inception to gaining that first funding round and so on and so forth. So I guess literally starting from the bottom, right? So let's say I'm a founder, I've got an idea, I've built aspects of the product. Like, what would be the first steps that I need to take to have a successful launch of the business?
Yeah, I would say you don't even need to start from building aspects of the product. So I would say you have an idea, and I think the first thing you want to do is go about validating that other people have that and there's significant pain and urgency around that problem. So like a really common way to do this is people will often be within a larger enterprise already. They'll have built some piece of internal tooling for that company and they'll go, oh, hey, if I had this problem here, this was a big problem. My team just spent months or years building it. I want to take that type of problem space and build a company externally around it. And so then you have the validation of like, oh, I had this problem. The thing I would do next from there is find a couple other people who are in similar positions to you at similar organizations and see if they have that same problem. And they are also going, hey, I really want to be able to purchase that. Hey, I really want to work with you. Hey, I want to be your first design partner. It shouldn't be something where you feel like you're trying to convince people. You want to find a problem where people are going to pull it out of you. Um, we just did Boldstart, and so many of our founders are at similar stages. In March, we had a Founders Day, and a lot of the founders talked about how much benefit they got out of selling ahead of their roadmap. So basically, thinking about the direction they were going to go, and then go lining up those design partners who have those problems before they've even built anything.
Mm-hmm. So that validation piece is like really, really, really important. And I guess how could so one of the things that you mentioned there is about how can how can an individual choose their three design partners, and they shouldn't have to sell it. It should be genuine problems that that design partner faces. But like, how would somebody go against validating that? What are the key things that you always teach, or yeah, what are the key things that you say to founders in terms of how to validate that?
Yeah, so I think you wanna narrow down on who the people say the ICP or the ideal customer profile, and so I think you wanna narrow down on who is it that it's going to use this. So I think some of the most challenging ones is since we're working with so many technical companies, I'll get a really talented engineer who will come in and be like, "I built this thing. Every engineer can use it." You're kind of like, "Okay," but, like, how are you gonna know if it's working if you're getting, like, some feedback from Java developers and some feedback from Ruby people and some people in large companies and some people in small companies? Like, engineers aren't a monolithic group. And so you really want to help make sure the first step is like, are you talking to the right people and getting feedback from the right people? And who is your perspective on the type of developer or the type of developer community who gets the most benefit out of the product? I spend that like in the developer framework since I work with a lot of developer focused companies. But if it's an enterprise, you can think of like the same type of user with an enterprise, be it on a marketing team or on a sales team or whoever your group is.
Yeah, and I guess like you've done this so many times, even doing it yourself, right? I guess what are some of the common misconceptions that founders have at this stage?
Yeah, I think a big one is founders will have this misconception of like, okay, I'm gonna go like sell my first big thing and I'm gonna like walk in and talk to a CISO and be like, pay me $100,000 for this or whatever it is. There's sort of like this conception of once you decide pricing, pricing is monolithic and it's the same forever and you never change it. Or like you walk in and you try to sell something and your job is to like be the most convincing. And so I think that's probably the biggest misconception about the process. Whereas I would almost think of it much more as like customer discovery, user research, product marketing, where it's more that you're trying to get in front of the person who you think is your ideal customer and learn as much as possible about the problem, how they think about it, and how they talk about it. So you can mirror back with that language as you're working with them.
Hmm. And when obviously they're working with this design partner, whoever they choose as that first customer, is that typically something that founders should do for free? Should it be a charge thing? Like, how would you typically advise it from that situation?
It depends. So sometimes what will happen when you have a company that's solving a very popular problem and people are like really saying, yes, this is a huge problem for me, they'll have 200 people come in and say, hey, I want to buy this from you right now. And when you have that sort of situation, you might not necessarily be able to support all of them, especially if you're a small team like you usually are early on. And in that regards, you might say, okay, I'm going to gate this. This is either a beta or a private waitlist situation, or I only have slots for so many customers. And that can kind of help you gauge the urgency that people have. And so maybe one thing you could ask for is like it could be a paid partnership if it's that type of thing. I think that tends to work best in spaces where the customer may already be buying something and sort of a replacement. So there's already budget for the space. It can also be if you're particularly early and you're not sure you've locked on your final direction, instead of saying, hey, this is going to be a paid partnership, you can say, hey, we're going to have a regular feedback call. Or you can even say, hey, at the beginning, this isn't going to be a paid partnership, but we're going to write in our design partner agreement that like year one, this is the feedback period, and year two, the rate will be this. And so you have a lot of different levers you can pull as you're thinking about how you want to set those up.
Amazing, amazing. And I guess like as a founder, right? So I'm choosing my three design partners. Let's say that I've chosen them and I've started to develop the product, and I feel like I'm in a situation where I've been hyper specific with what I'm focusing on with my niche. I know exactly where my product market fit is going. I know I have now an understanding of like what the narrative and what the roadmap looks like, and I've done it with three design partners. What are then some of the next steps that I need to take in order to scale?
Yeah, I would definitely say this is, I think, another one where people will be like, "Oh, I'll get the first 3 and then it'll be everyone." And again, it's like one of those things where you always kind of want to be thinking about the next, say, 10x. And so maybe it's not even 10 at first. Maybe you say like, "Okay, I have 3 design partners and they went really well. Now I have this new experiment that I'm gonna run for like my next cohort of 7." And then once you have 10, you're kind of going, "Okay, now I have 10 of them. I want to get up to 20." And so I think one thing that sort of changes is in the first cohort, it's probably going to be all founder-led sales and partnership where the founder is going out with their unique story as a founder and like that energy they tend to have. Founders just tend to bring something special to a sales conversation or to a customer conversation. And so you want to get to a point where you have a cohort of customers that's large enough that someone could call up all of those customers and they would hear a consistent thing about the product. They would hear something consistent about the problem they're solving. They would be able to see traits of the organization or traits of other tools they're using. And that would help people come to a more repeatable process, either about the types of prospects they want to be putting in the funnel or about what it will take to close those. And so I think kind of once you get to that scale of people use like the million of ARR as a like a thumbnail thing, maybe it's a little bit earlier, maybe it's a little bit later, but like once you start to see consistency across the founder sales and in the customer base, that's when you can start to think about building out more of a go-to-market team around it.
And creating that feedback loop is so important. Like so important. And would you say it's even more credible when the founder can show how much he cares to these design partners? Like, I'm going to create the feedback loop. I want to be at the forefront of it, and I want to hear exactly what it is, whether it's positive or negative sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the thing is I think sometimes another misconception, since you asked about that before, sometimes founders feel like, oh, I only want to be hearing good things or I'm only going to share the good things from the call. I actually think having really engaged design partners who are giving you critical feedback can be a great sign. If they care enough that they're using the product and going, this is a problem, and this problem, this is a problem, as long as you're hearing some consistency in those problems, like that's great. You don't need to ship a perfect product on day one. You need to ship a product that solves enough of a problem that someone wants to engage with it and buy it and keep using it.
Yeah, yeah. And taking a bit of a back step from that conversation, I guess like let's say I'm a founder again and I'm now seeking, I've got the idea obviously, and I'm now looking at which VCs or which investors should I look to engage in order to support us more effectively. And like you'll be in a great position to answer this. Like for you as a partner in an inception focused VC, what are the specific qualities that you look for in early stage founders and startups when considering that partnership and investment?
Yeah, this is such a great question. I think another place founders can sometimes waste a lot of time is kind of seeing like, oh, I just need to find a VC to fund me. Most VCs have like fairly specific perspectives on what they do. And so like if I get a pitch for a series A, that's like immediately a no because that's not an inception deal. And that doesn't mean the company isn't great. It doesn't even mean it's not in my area of interest, but it's still not within the core thesis. And so I think a lot of founders will hear stories about people saying like, "Oh, you've got to pitch 100 people before you find the one that works." And I think founders can apply more diligence early and saying like, "Okay, here's the like small set of people who are the best fit for me," and save a lot of energy that way by doing it. Um and so for me that's really like when I'm looking at founders in early stage, the first thing is are you actually at inception? And that's pretty easy. The next one is we're all enterprise focused, but it's really about like, do I see a large market that exists here today or that I believe alongside you is going to be a large market in the coming 5 to 10 years? Um, and so sometimes founders will kind of start from the detail level about what they're doing, but I think you really need to get the venture investor on board with the fact that there is a large market here first. And then once someone's saying, okay, like, yes, you're at the right stage, this is a market, it is within the sphere of things I invest in, then you can kind of get into here is the unique approach and how we're thinking about it. For me, one of the things I look for there, and it's interesting because they're kind of opposite ends of the spectrum. There's a big vision around the large market. And then there's the like very small detail level of like, here's the experiment and what I'm going to do in the coming weeks and months to prove one step on the way to the large market. And then ideally, as we continue to dig into the process, it'll kind of being like, okay, this is our first hypothesis. If this like holds true, what are we going to do next? And so sort of mapping out the journey of like you can even imagine a set of dominoes that like as you prove each step, you get to a large and enduring company.
And should I have done that market validation prior to coming to someone like yourself?
I think yes. I think without knowing that a market is there, it's very hard to make a credible pitch for what you're going to do. I think a lot of people either validate the market because they've worked in the market before and come with personal experience from it, or they've had some of those upfront conversations. But I honestly think founders just owe it to themselves. If you're going to spend 10 years of your life working on a business, you want to know, and you want it to be a venture backed huge business, you want to know that it's big enough before you start raising money and having external stakeholders involved. If you're saying you're going to start a business that it's going to be more of a lifestyle business, not in a pejorative way at all, but just like the type of small business you can run and it pays your salary and your income. You don't necessarily need to be thinking about is the market giant because you don't necessarily need a giant market for that.
Yeah, yeah. So I've now got market validation, and I've come to Boldstart, and I'm in a position where we're going to do certain A/B tests to again further validate that market. I'm now choosing my three design partners. I'm now looking at right. I've got to my first million in ARR. I guess the next step, obviously, from there would typically be looking to plug in some sort of go to market resource, and like we all had a really interesting chat about this a couple of weeks ago in terms of like that first hire to make. Should it be the VP of sales? Should it be an AE? Should it be a rep? Or what it is like? Different people have different viewpoints on this sort of topic. Like, what's your stance on that?
It's funny. I saw a tweet yesterday about like the enduring VC Twitter debates, and is your first salesperson a VP or an AE is definitely one of the canonical things we all like to argue with each other about. I'm definitely on the stage where I think you should usually hire a player first. I think like coming out of the founder sales, when you're hiring that first player, they're going to be like working side by side with the founder and they can kind of internalize and build experiences with them. And I guess the exception to that I would say is like, this is kind of saying I want the best of both worlds. But if you can get someone who's maybe at the director level, hasn't been a VP before, is super excited about taking that next step, and is really excited to be hands on with you in the weeds, I think that's like the ideal scenario. Like, I think it's very hard to hire a leader without having them actually want to do some of the like day-to-day selling work. I think the other thing that goes hand in hand with that is I think if you hire a leader and they're excited to hire an entire team and then those reps take time to ramp and get to their quota, if you've hired the wrong leader who's hired the wrong team, you might be 6 to 9 months down the line before you figure it out. And that's a big and expensive mistake. And so I think sometimes having that first hire be someone who's actually in the weeds with you is a faster way to learn and make sure that you're getting the right person in the chair.
Yeah, and I listened to a really interesting podcast about this topic the other day from Shlomik, the other partner at Boldstart. He did a podcast with Ethan, the VP of sales at Sneak, and they were talking about the early days and what happened. And I think Ethan and Guy, the founder at Sneak, were going to on-sites together and getting involved. So when it obviously switches to you've hired a go-to-market person, and whether it's a VP or a rep, they're obviously going to be responsible for it, but it doesn't mean that the founder stops being founder-led sales. It's that collaboration piece between that founder and the initial go-to-market.
The best founders I know are still selling all the way through their journey, all the way through their company going towards an IPO. They are still out there closing some of those big and most important deals. And obviously, you need an entire organization, but I think founders need to stay close to their customers all the way through.
For sure, for sure. And I want to stick it around this early stage thing because I think, Ellen, it's something where you can really add value. And for any founders out there, like this is like a really interesting topic. So we've obviously discussed about what are some of the steps that founders need to take from inception. But what we've not spoke about is how early stage founders can effectively build relationships with venture capitalists and what they should keep in mind during these interactions essentially. So like I guess what advice would you give for someone who's seeking that relationship and what should they keep in mind?
Yeah. There's a lot of ways. Like, I think one of the best times, frankly, to meet VCs can be before you've decided you wanna start your company. So if you have listeners who are kind of sitting in leadership roles right now in their organization, think maybe they wanna be an angel investor someday, they wanna be a founder someday, that's the kind of time you can be building a really open relationship with someone else. That can be through doing events in your local community, that can just be getting on the phone and doing a quick Zoom or a coffee or whatever it is. And I think those relationships can be a little bit more authentic. I think sometimes what people end up doing is they end up going, "Oh, I've decided I'm gonna start a company. Oh, I want to fundraise in 2 months. Oh, I'm going to build relationships now." And as much as that gives you a little more time in the fundraising process, that still puts the relationship in the context of like, "Okay, you've just started this company, you're going, we're thinking about this space and this deal together," which is a little bit different than just saying, "Hey, I've met you. We are interested in the same technical spaces. We're interested in the same types of companies. Like, let's start having conversations." And so some of those, like, I always love meeting people who are buyers of new technologies and spending time with them from that context. I love meeting people who are excited about a certain piece of technology and maybe want to start writing angel checks and build a relationship in that context. But I think the more you can build relationships with venture investors just authentically by doing other things in the community you're interested in, I think that's a very good way to go about it.
Yeah. And I think a lot of founders probably make numerous mistakes when it comes to pitching to VCs and not having necessarily done the right things prior to building that relationship. What are some of the common mistakes that you see when founders are pitching, and how can people look to avoid that?
Yeah, so we already covered one of the big ones, which is just pitching the wrong people. Like, sometimes people will get me on the phone and wanna get me really excited about their new consumer app, and I'm like, "I'm happy to, like." I try to be a nice person, I'm happy to talk to you and try to give you feedback, but, like, I'm not gonna have the best consumer app feedback, and it's still not gonna be within my mandate. So I think sometimes people have the targeting problem. I think the other one can kind of be the, like, wanting to convince or the arguing problem, where a lot of the times you just want an investor who sees the world the same way you do, and you're probably gonna have some good match between the business where you come in and, like, people are intrigued and they're asking questions, they wanna keep going along with you. If someone is more hesitant or they say like, "Oh, I've seen this before, this is how I expect it to play out," and they don't have that shared world view with you, it's unlikely you're gonna get them to come around to being an investor in your company by trying to, like, refute point by point. There's a great article from, I think it's Brendan Baker, wrote about like the idea of excitement compared to hesitation. And so if you're running into someone with too many hesitations, it's hard to overcome all of them. You want to hit that excitement point first. So I think that's a big part of it. And then I think another one is just when you're the founder, you're the one driving the conversation. And so I definitely would come into a pitch saying like, okay, these are the things I want to communicate. And that doesn't mean don't leave space for questions or don't leave space to move into like a more interactive version of the information. But remember that you're the one driving the flow of the meeting and you know what information you want to get through.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. And I guess that's something people could take away is that like this it is a conversation, it is a dialogue, but like the founder is the person that's driving the idea. You've got to try and get the buy-in. Of course, leave room for Q&A because they're going to want to ask a few questions and qualify a bit further. But having a direct agenda and set it like you would with any prospect, making sure we know exactly what it is that we all want to get out of the meeting. Um, I guess is there any examples you can share, obviously without dropping names, but is there any examples if you can share where things a pitch has gone really well or when a pitch hasn't necessarily gone very well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always a delight. Like, I feel like when it goes well, you really feel the energy of both people feeding off of each other. And so a founder might say like, "Oh, here's the type of customer I'm trying to sell into." And then the venture capitalist can kind of be like, "Oh, I know someone exactly like that." Either with like we always try to do this. We try to introduce you to people who are founders within the portfolio with this problem or people in our network outside. And if I come in and I like hear the problem and I know of someone already who has that, I'm like, "Oh, this is great. I really would like to introduce you to this person who could be a potential customer." And for me, even if even if it ends up not being the right fit with Boldstart, if I've managed to introduce a customer to an early stage company, like I think that's a great win for both of us. And so like that's the sort of thing that makes a pitch feel really effective is when we can kind of end up in that place together.
You've got to have one where it's gone bad. I really want one where it's
Oh
like the
yeah.
worst thing you've ever seen.
Oh, there is a trait some people will have where I think it's definitely a nerves thing, and you never wanna be down on people just because it can be a scary situation to go and ask someone for money, especially for the first time. It can be challenging when someone won't pause at all, so I've definitely been on calls where we have 30 minutes to get through, and, like, there's not a way to get a word in edgewise. Even if you're trying to interrupt, you like will try to interrupt and the person will just keep talking. And I think that doesn't really serve anyone well. Because like if you think about it, if you're a founder, you're trying to get all this information across, but I would hope that every time you talk to an investor, you get at least one thing you can use. Maybe it's not as great as a customer introduction, but a piece of feedback or a question that makes you think about something differently, or like a parallel to another business or a partnership idea. Like I would hope that there's enough space for both people to contribute so the founder ends up with value too.
Yeah, and it helps build that resilience as a founder, because I think there's that corny phrase, right? You don't lose, you learn. But like I think it's right at that sort of stage. You need to build that resilience, because I think what is it, Jeff Bezos made 67 pitches before he got his first bit of investment. So building that resilience as a founder, and it might not always specifically go to plan, but we've got to keep going on. But I've seen it time and time and again where people don't stop talking, and it's like, come on, we're having a conversation here. And I guess, so moving a little bit away from obviously what we've discussed in terms of that idea of a founder getting the idea in inception, I think you, Ellen, are someone who has a very good holistic overview of the market. You're a technical person by trade, then been a founder, now got the VC hat on, essentially. Like, the market shifted a lot over the last 12, 18, 24 months. Like, how do you see the market coming into 2024? What are some of the trends that you see this year?
I mean, I don't think you can get away from this in any conversation, but we're definitely seeing a lot of enthusiasm for AI companies, especially generative AI companies. I think there's certainly some like bifurcation there where we're starting to see some like really deep, interesting plays. And there's also still a lot of people are kind of out there like, this is cool. I'm just going to add it to this random thing. And you're like, does that software really need this? Like, I think any good company should be able to exist as a good company without having a generative AI layer. And that should be like a nice bonus on top of it or makes the experience more effective. But there should always still be like a core business and a core pain point. So that's a big piece. I do feel like kind of no matter the economic climate, there's always like really good founders out there who have something they want to build, and now is the right time for them. And so, kind of, we have consistently been seeing some founders, but I do feel like things have been like really picking up the pace so far in 2024.
So you've seen a lot more momentum in terms of you having a lot more conversations now than you were last year.
I am. And that's not true across the board. I think it varies partner by partner, fund by fund. I would say last year I felt like things were a little bit quieter than they had been. And then this year I just feel like it's really picked up.
Yeah, yeah. I remember when we met the other week. We had the dinner at 7. You were still on the phone at 7, having to go out every now and then to close. So it's good to hear that it's a busy time. And obviously, we spoke about generative AI and we spoke about AI, both those buzzwords within the industry that everyone keeps talking about. But what other product verticals do you see is on the rise? Like, what do you see growing over the next few years, product vertical wise?
Yeah, I think we're definitely seeing a lot more kind of deep tech and hardware related risk happening. Leopold from Humba Ventures has been writing about that a lot, and I feel like there's been more people going in that direction, which has been interesting for sure. I mean, one of the things I like about kind of the Boldstart's focus is like enterprise software is bread and butter. Like every enterprise has things they can be doing better. We can always be making better infrastructure, and so I see that as being like a continual theme. As much as everyone like we're still in a cloud transformation, even as we also get an AI transformation.
You mentioned the hardware thing. Talk to us a little bit around that. It's not. I'm obviously specifically when SaaS and tech, but what's the hardware thing that you mentioned?
Oh, I just think historically it was really expensive to build hardware innovation because if you think about it, you have to do a factory run and there's like a fair amount of risk of are you building custom components or are you buying components off the shelf? And I think from a lot of the work that's gone into the autonomous vehicle industry and some other places, we're starting to see more fundamental primitives be easy for other companies to build on top of. And so I think we're seeing more of a renaissance there.
Right. Okay. So we're going back to the early days, but now things are getting a little bit cheaper and more efficient to build.
Yes, exactly.
Amazing, amazing. Well, Ellen, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the pod. I think any early stage founder is going to get a lot out of listening to it. You're someone who has a very good overview on the market, and I'm sure if anyone wants to follow up with yourself after listening, maybe has any questions around trying to get that idea to inception to Series A, then yeah, they'll definitely know where to go after this.
Yeah, please email me anytime. I'm Ellen at boldstart.vc and easy to find anywhere on the internet.
Awesome. Ellen, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you want more information about the podcast, head over to our website, Scale with Strive.